So yeah, we're just gonna take a look at the game 7 between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. And this game, Fabiano was playing with the black pieces for the second time in a row. Magnus had white 3 out of the last 4 games, so from Fabi's perspective, or his team's perspective, surviving the middle portion of the match would be a very, very good sign for Fabiano going forward. Also, I think every draw that he secures or every game that he plays, that's him, number one, getting used to the World Championship format. He never played one before, so there's some nerves to get rid of, some confidence issues. But it seems like Fabiano is just getting into stride here. He's holding Magnus extremely comfortably, especially with the black pieces. So there's that to think about as well. I think Fabiano is getting more comfortable as the match goes on, especially since he's neither of them are behind. So going into this match, or this game I should say, everyone was wondering what's Magnus going to play. Opens up with d4. Today he's tried everything. Tried c4, e4, d4. So he's looking to just experiment, and e4 against Fabiano's Petrov did not go that well yesterday for Magnus, as he came very close to losing. So what we actually saw was him go for the Queen's Gambit declined, or it's Fabiano who chose that, but Magnus who sort of repeated all the same moves. For those that remember round 2. Round 2, all these moves that I'm playing so far are identical, which is why I'm going through them sort of quickly here. This is just some really explored territory in the Queen's Gambit declined, and all these moves have been seen before. All these moves have been seen before. All theory, exactly. So knight d2, this was the first moment where the position actually deviated. Last time we saw this, actually, it was queen a5, and then I believe the move rook to d1 was met by rook to d8. Usually, rook to e8 was the main move. So this is probably what Magnus was expecting when he played into it last time. Fabiano surprised Magnus and a lot of people with the move rook d8, and it worked very well. I think he got an extremely comfortable equality, and his preparation for the World Championship match in this instance was very successful. So, score 1 for Fabiano, good prep. He earned a draw earlier on. Now, if Magnus had played this move again, maybe Fabiano would have played rook e8. Rook d8 was sort of his one move surprise the last time they played this. But this time it was actually Magnus who deviated first and played the move knight to d2. So knight to d2 very simply threatens knight b3. You'd love to trade the bishop for the knight there. After, let's say, a weak move like h6, you just play knight b3, take that bishop. In fact, knight b3 would actually even win the piece after knight a4. So comes with a very obvious threat, and Fabiano meets that by going queen to d8. Might look crazy to go all the way back to d8 after just playing queen a5, but if white misplaces his knight by going backwards, then black has no issue playing queen d8. If the knight goes back to f3, of course Fabiano could return with queen a5. So knight b3 was played, bishop b6, bishop e2, and this is pretty similar to Magnus's treatment of this opening last time. He wants to play bishop e2 and castle as soon as possible. During the game, it seemed to me like rook d1 was a very decent alternative. A few lines here, rook d1, one of them that looked pretty interesting was queen e7. And the idea of actually sacrificing a pawn here, playing bishop e6 and developing with tempo. Let's say rook d1, bishop takes b3, takes, give this annoying check, and the king actually has to go to e2, and after a move like rook d8, let's say, maybe even this one, we have knight d4 check as a threat, taking advantage of the pin. This king is blocking the bishop, stuck in the middle. There's also g5 coming. I mean, this looks like more than enough compensation for the pawn that black is down. So these were a few of the lines that looked pretty good, like queen e7 and just offering to sacrifice that pawn. So I'm not sure if that played into it, but it seemed to me like that was why Magnus didn't go for rook to d1. Another move that I see just mentioned in the chat here, which I did mention during the commentary, but it's worth noting that b4, just as an example, you often get positions where black plays a5 and starts to undermine this pawn with all the pressure here, and after b5, simple move like knight b8, and sometimes it can be really annoying dealing with this loose pawn on a3. Black's just going to reroute the knight to c5, take advantage of all these dark square holes, move like a4, you get bishop b4 with knight to c5. So yeah, in general, b4 is probably met with something like that. Knight d2, queen d8. I see someone shouting about b4, but b4 is not playable with the queen pinning the a pawn. So knight b3, bishop b6, bishop e2, queen e7, bishop g5, and this is probably the moment in the game where I only saw or only bothered calculating one continuation, which was d takes c4, and that's the one that Fabiano played in the game. The reason that I thought it was so strong was because how forcing the variation was. So bishop g5 was Magnus's move. I think there's a lot of moves that could have been played, but queen e7 gets ready to play potentially e5, potentially just dc4, and just get a very symmetrical pawn structure and equalize there. So bishop g5, dc4, this is the forcing line that I was considering. Knight d2 was played, but bishop c4 is a major alternative. And what we couldn't find an answer to during the commentary was simply h6. Let's say bishop f4 first, then I think e5, bishop g3, and bishop e6 is a really nice way to just equalize. I don't think anyone is going to be better in this position. Very, very equal. And if we play bishop, well, bishop takes f6, either of these moves can be played. If black is really ambitious, maybe take with the pawn and play f5, but if black is just reasonable and wants a slightly better position, then queen takes, and there's no reason that white should be happy with having to give up the bishop pair like that. Bishop h4 is the last alternative, and after knight e5 with tempo, knight g6 with tempo, you get out of the pin, and after bishop g3, I like to move bishop c7, which trades the bishop and prepares just bishop d7 and bishop c6, and I just don't see any reason why black should have any issues defending this position, or I don't even know if black's the one that should be defending. It looks like he's already equalized completely. So that's why dc4 seemed like such a strong move. So dc4 was played by Fabiano after quite a long think, and feels like I'm in a disco there, Jaren.
Yeah, I'm noticing it.
Feels like I'm really in a disco here. Maybe I need some techno music. Queen e7 there. The reason he played knight d2 was because of that line that I just went through. I'm pretty sure that that's just equal for black. So he tries knight d2, knight e5, castle, bishop d7, and I think probably the most important thing was that if we just take a step back and look at the position earlier, we remember that white played this move. He took his bishop from f4 and he put it on g5 without being provoked. So he said, you know, your queen e7 move is not good because of bishop g5. And then later on down the line, he just moved the bishop away from g5 unprovoked, basically saying, well, I was wrong. So when I saw bishop g5 and then I saw bishop back to f4, that bishop has moved way too many times in the opening, and it always looked unprovoked, so it seemed like a concession that Magnus had to move his bishop to g5 and then back to f4. So when I saw that, I figured that Fabiano was just completely okay in this position and that there wasn't any advantage. After knight takes c4, bishop c7, it's the same kind of idea that I went through in the last variation. Just want to trade these bishops. Bishop sits very nicely on c6, and again, the pawn structure is symmetrical. Just don't see any reason why black is worse. So it seemed like right from the get-go in this game, Fabiano's Queen's Gambit prep was very solid. Magnus didn't get anything out of the opening, and essentially, I'm just going to fast forward a bunch of trades here, which were not terribly interesting. And then the last part of the game where something could have happened was here, when Magnus got the knight against bishop imbalance and decided to play e4 and have the idea of trying to play exclusively in the dark squares. Why? Because there's a light square bishop here for Fabiano, and this was the last moment where things could have got interesting because of the presence of an imbalance. The pawns, though, are pretty much dead equal and symmetrical on both sides, so nothing really to play for. However, Queen c7 was a very accurate move. I'll just demonstrate, for example, not playing Queen c7. I think after this move, it's really easy to imagine getting in trouble in a position like this, where white does put some pressure and can use the knight a lot more effectively than this bishop against the pawn chain like that. So it was pretty important that Fabi played the move Queen c7 like he did. Another line that we looked at during the broadcast was to actually give up that pawn on g3 and go for something like this, hitting the bishop and hitting the pawn, and saying that there's no draw because the queen covers, but unfortunately either a move like f6 or g5 is going to give access to the h4 square for the black queen, and this will be a draw at the very least for sure. So yeah, I didn't see many things to do. Queen c7 is nice because it hits the pawn. If you just guard that pawn with king f2, then there would follow probably queen c5 check, and if you move the knight, black would happily take on c3 and maybe play the move e5, f6, and just bring the king to the middle. So once again, this looked like it would be dead equal without anything really to play for. So what did happen after all these trades, liquidation, is Magnus decided to go for it a little bit with e5, fixing the light square pawns. Queen c5, king h2, and this is the peak of excitement in this game, guys. e5, that was it. e5 was the biggest controversial move of this entire game. Fabiano, I think, pretty much played flawlessly. Magnus didn't play poorly either, but he didn't get an advantage, and that's usually what you strive to do with the white pieces. Try to demonstrate that extra move, going first, means something. There are a lot of ways to actually mess this endgame up, so I wouldn't say that it's just trivial, but the way that it played out seemed to be a lot more simple than it was. Essentially, the black king just comes to the middle, and you try to put these pawns on dark squares where you can, and the bishop, importantly, takes away all these squares from the white knight, so you can't start jumping around and attacking these pawns. So f6, f4, trying to stay on dark squares, and again, in this position, black is threatening to just bring the king to d5, and white can't really get the king up to d4 because of the move bishop f1 hitting the pawn. So for example, king e3, bishop f1, he has to go back, king f2, and this is where we saw repetition. I think if Magnus wanted to go for anything here, it would have to be g4, but the issue I have with g4 is potentially if I just take, play king here, and after king there, play king d5. Now sure, you can go win this pawn, but those are my double isolated pawns. I don't really care about them. Meanwhile, I'm attacking the e5 pawn, and actually if anyone is better here, it's probably going to be black, because the bishop is suddenly more useful than the knight, and if the knight moves away to guard the pawn, you got the invasion happening here. The queenside pawns are very weak, and the bishop's always better than the knight whenever there's like a pass pawn race between two sides of the board. And of course, if king here, you do have to think about the move g5, and again, any type of race with passed pawns, usually the bishop is the favorite. So once again, in this position here, we did just see bishop a6, king e3, bishop f1, king f2, bishop a6, back and forth, and that's the repetition that concluded this game as a draw. So yes, for those wondering, this Game 7 of the World Championship match was a draw between Magnus and Fabiano, and that means that after 7 rounds, we have still a tied match, all draws so far, and it's still a 12-game match. So like I was saying earlier, I think that all the draws do favor Fabiano at the moment, as he's sort of getting his comfort zone, and he has been neutralizing Magnus when Magnus has the white pieces, and he has been pushing them, in some of these games. Magnus came very close to losing in the last round. So basically both players have come close to losing, and all the games have been drawn so far. And tomorrow, finally, Fabi gets the white pieces in round 8. So that's pretty much it for this game. Rather uneventful draw and really good preparation neutralizing Magnus was Fabiano Caruana.